friends, welcome back to the Infinite Library, and today we're doing the Magical Readathon wrap-up, as well as all the other books that I happened to read in April, because I read quite a lot. This was definitely my best reading month so far. If you're wondering what on earth is going on with my hair, I don't know either. I'm gonna go get it all cut off tomorrow, so it'll look different in the next video, but for now we're just kind of working with what we've got here. So, the stats for what I read this month in April. I actually managed to read 16 books, which is a lot more than I've been able to read in the last couple of months. This is the Magical Readathon apparently. But I also had an additional 3 DNFs, and I rarely DNF. There are reasons for all of these which make a lot of sense, and I will explain once we get to them. But I will say that at least for 2 of the 3, they're more soft DNFs. So yeah, I'll go over those later. Page-wise, I read 4,522 pages, which is definitely my best so far this year. Format-wise, I read 2 of these books physically, 5 audio, and 2 digitally. That doesn't work out in terms of the math, so I'ma just put here what it's supposed to be. I think I probably read more physically than that. I think the remaining ones are physical. Genre-wise, I read 10 fantasy, 3 sci-fi, 2 horror, 1 romance, 1 pure romance, by the way. There was a lot of romance in my books, but 1 pure romance, that was the only one I read. 1 graphic novel, 1 literary fiction, and 2 middle grade fiction. And where I got them from, the source, 6 were from my existing TBR, 8 were from the library, 2 I bought, 3 were ARCs, and 2 were rereads. And so, bringing it down to the ratings, I obviously had the 3 DNFs, unfortunately, so they don't get a rating. But I had no 1 stars, I had 2 2 stars, which is always disappointing, 6 3 stars, 5 4 stars, and 2 5 stars. I don't think I've had more than 1 5 star in a month. In a long time. So I'm really happy that I actually got not just 1 but 2 5 stars this month. So all the reading I did at least pay off in terms of that. So now on to the actual books I read. So as this is Magical Readathon, I debated just doing a kind of like reading from giving you my reviews of like my worst books to my best books, but because I ended up actually doing 2 job callings this time rather than 1, I thought I'd actually deal with what I read for the readathon, and then I'll throw in all the ones that I read after the readathon at the very end. So for anyone who doesn't know, Magical Readathon is run by G from Book Roast. It is kind of like a magical school academia sort of readathon that runs generally in the months of April and August throughout the year, but there's also like a year-long quest as well. But essentially what you do is you create a character and they have a job calling. And to get that job calling, you have to read certain subjects, which are basically prompts. My character is called Elspeth, and she is a Feywild cartographer. I've completed 1 year so far of her being a Feywild cartographer, so now this is me going into my 2nd year. So I had 7 prompts to read for Feywild cartographer, and then because I ended up actually reading them really fast and I was in such a big reading mood, I ended up picking up the new calling Thread Mage because it just sounded so fun. Essentially, this is kind of like spinning off how G is really into crocheting and stuff at the moment, and I also like sew and stuff, so yeah, I thought it would be fun, so I ended up picking up the Thread Mage calling, which was another 5 books. These are some of the books that I read for Feywild cartographer. 2 of them I believe are digital, so I don't have them physically, but I'm going to go over them all from beginning to end. So the first book that I read was Elemental Studies, and for that I read Assistant to the Villain. So the prompt for Elemental Studies is to read a book with a source of light on the cover. And this one has a candle, so that is what I picked for it. I actually buddy read this with Claire from Claire's Magical Reading Corner, I think her name is. I'm sorry, I'll put her actual name down below. But I buddy read this with her, and neither of us liked it, like, at all. I think I felt mixed going into this because I'm obviously not really massive on romantasy, but the premise of this sounded so good, and like I was like, if this kind of like is heavy on the comedy and I like the romance, then I think I would like this. And whilst I did actually like the humour in this, everything else was dreadful. There was like barely any plot, and I didn't really care about what plot was going on. I didn't like either of the main two characters in the romance, to be honest, which was a shame, and also always kind of kills a romance if you don't even like the participants in it. And like there's a mystery that kind of is going through this, and like that was the only reason honestly that I didn't DNF this, was that I was kind of like wanting to know what the mystery was, and when the reveal finally happened I was like, I care even less now, because I didn't even like what the reveal was. It wasn't even like a good reveal. So yeah, I just really didn't like this. Unfortunately, it did not work for me in the slightest. I guess I should give you a little summary of what it's about. Basically it's kind of like set in this like medieval fantasy land, and there is like a scary evil villain guy who's like supposed to be terrorizing the village, and our main character, whose name is Evie, ends up kind of accidentally bumping into him and is hired by him to work as his personal assistant. So great premise, honestly. And she kind of like is trying not to fall in love with him, and then she obviously like it does the thing where like you find out he's really not as bad as it's making him out to be. And like I said, I actually really enjoyed the humour in this, and it's rare for me to like humour, but I just couldn't get behind either of the characters. I hated them both, and I just found Evie to be really like annoying, because like every time she'd be doing something she kind of interrupt herself to just kind of swoon over the boss and how hot he was, and then be like, oh but I can't do that, and it was just really annoying, unfortunately. So yeah, it had a lot of promise, but I really didn't end up liking this. I gave it a 2-star. I think that tells you how much I did not like it, because I rarely rate that low. But okay, yeah, I just checked and I actually rated this a 2.5. I think if it hadn't been for the humour actually working for me, it would have been a 2. But I did like the humour, and I did somehow manage to push my way through it, although honestly if it hadn't have been the fact it was a buddy read, I wouldn't have. But yeah, both of us came out of this being like, we should have DNF'd it. So suffice to say, I will not be carrying on this series. However, a friend of mine is interested in this, so I'm going to happily pass this on to her, and I really hope it works for her instead, because it didn't work for me, unfortunately. So that was my first subject. The second subject was shapeshifting. The prompt for that is based around mimics. For shapeshifting, I had to read from an author who blurbed your last 5-star, and I ended up finding out that Gabby Burton had blurred my last 5-star, which was Voyage of the Damned, and I happened to have one of her books from an Illumicrate book box, and honestly it's one that I probably wouldn't have picked up otherwise. I really did need a prompt for me to actually pick this up. So this is Sing Me to Sleep by Gabby Burton, and it is based around a girl who is a siren, but she's a siren in secret, and she also is an assassin by night, because it's kind of part of her siren deal is that she kind of like has this hunger to kill, and she needs to satiate it, so she basically takes on hits from people who she assumes are awful people to kill them. But she ends up being chosen to be the bodyguard for the prince of the country, who is like basically her worst enemy. If he finds out what she is so dead, and her family are so dead. And a big part of this is her relationship to do with her sister, which I really liked. She has a younger sister than her, who she is, most of her motivations in this book are to do with her trying to protect her younger sister, which obviously it isn't helped by the fact that she's killing people on the side, but you know, it is what it is. And I liked this one well enough, I'd say. It's a 3-star read, I think. I didn't love it, but I certainly wasn't bored when I was reading it, and I did like it. I don't know, like, I know the sequel is coming out quite soon. Picture here of what it is. I do actually really like the cover for that one, but I don't know if I'm gonna pick it up, to be honest. I wasn't really vibing with the romance. It felt kind of forced, and even though I did kind of like the prince character, he ended up being a bit more interesting than I thought he was going to be. I didn't really see them as having this like connection, this relationship that I think it was really trying to push. So that was a shame. Honestly, with this one, I liked the side characters more than I liked the main two. Like the main girl, Sasha, I think her name is. I could never really connect with her, and I don't know if part of that is because of her whole I'm killing people and I'm enjoying it thing. Like, I thought her relationship with her sister was really sweet, but she just went from bad decision to bad decision to bad decision, and it kind of made me not want to root for her because I just didn't like what she was doing a lot of the time. So I did end up liking the side characters more. There was like a twist villain reveal, which I really didn't like at all. I didn't see it coming though, I'll say that for it, but I didn't like it because it was kind of a gut punch and not a good one. Like, I know twist, reveal, and reveals are kind of supposed to be like that, but given who Saoirse knows in the book and who this person ended up being, I just really didn't like the reveal. The ending was really interesting though. I am kind of intrigued to see where it's going to go with the ending, because it really does open up a lot of where it could go from there. But I don't see how the relationship is going to last into the next part of the series, given how they leave things at the end of the book. So yeah, I don't think it's one I'm going to be continuing honestly either, to be honest. I'm probably going to be unhauling this book. It's not like my favourite special edition, although it is really nice under the dust jacket. I do like under the dust jacket, but I hate the dust jacket. It's super ugly, and honestly a reason why I haven't been picking it up previously. But I'm glad I finally read it. It's just a shame that it didn't really live up to what I was kind of hoping it was going to be, and I kind of went in with low expectations anyway. But it was an easy read, I'll give it that. So yeah, that was my second book of the month. Then I had to read Animal Studies, and that is really quite a simple prompt. It is just to read a book of an animal on the cover, or in the title, I think it is. So I picked up a graphic novel that I was really excited to read, and it's The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill, and I absolutely adored this one. This is just like the epitome of like a nice warm hug in a book, or like just sitting out and having a picnic in the height of summer. It was just wholesome and cute, and I love all the pastelness going on. I love the LGBT representation going on here, and the disability representation was a nice surprise as well. It's like, honestly, I could not give it a 5-star. Like, it's so short, there's not really a lot going on, although it does span like a whole year, and characters do develop, and honestly, like, I just wish it had been longer. Like, I know there are more books in this series. I think there's 3 in total in this series. But it was just really cute and really wholesome, and I loved it with all my heart, and now I need to buy all of them. Then I read Astronomy, which was to read a book recommended for my zodiac, which is Pisces, and I really struggled to find anything that I wanted to read for a Pisces. Like, so much of the stuff was just not my kind of thing at all, but I did finally manage to find something, which was an LGBT rom-com called Written in the Stars. I don't have this because I actually read it, I actually listened to it, sorry, via audiobook, and I didn't finish it. I DNF'd this one. I got a decent way through, I think I got through about 100 pages or so, and it's probably like a 300 page-ish sort of book, and I just really didn't like it. I had the same thing, unfortunately, that happened to Assistant to the Villain, in that I didn't really like either of the main characters. Essentially, these two girls have like a disastrous first date together after they get set up by one of their brothers, and then they end up accidentally get caught in a fake dating situation and have to pretend that they're still dating, and it's a whole thing, like, obviously with astronomy, because one of the girls basically is kind of like an astrologer for like a dating kind of app website kind of thing, and the other one doesn't believe in it at all, so it's kind of like a clash of personalities here. It's actually a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, which I didn't know, although I understood straight away once I started reading it, because one of the girls is called Darcy, and she is as standoffish as you would have expected Darcy to be as well. Honestly, like, I just didn't gel with the characters. Can't even remember what the other girl's name was, but she's obviously the one who's supposed to be Elizabeth, and I didn't like her. Like, she was just too pathetic. Like, she was kind of a wet blanket, and that is not who Elizabeth Bennet is. Like, maybe she kind of got more of a spine later on, but at least in those first 100 pages, like, I just was not enjoying her storyline at all. I wasn't really rooting for her. She was just, like, I was reading this book last month when it was like, when you was look every door, and it was like, oh, the protagonist is like as pathetic as you can get, and I just don't enjoy that for a protagonist. They're already kind of like at rock bottom and kind of swimming around in rock bottom. Like, I like it when they've got a bit more to them, a bit more motivation, and she just didn't have that, unfortunately. And Darcy was obviously, at the beginning of the book, as Darcy is, awful and a royal bitch, so I just couldn't get behind the relationship, and they had such opposing viewpoints that I was just like, I couldn't see how they were going to kind of work through it to have a foundation of a good, not toxic relationship. So I listened to it for as well as I could, and I just did not like it. I didn't really like the audiobook narrator either, unfortunately, so that didn't help matters. She's actually done like a lot of rom-com stuff, but I think this is the only like non-straight one she's done, and it was just very whiny. It kind of sounded to me, which did not help with me liking the characters, unfortunately. So yeah, that was my first DNF of the month. Then I did Alchemy, which also ended up accidentally being both the Magical Readathon book club book, and also my own book club book. But Alchemy is based around transmutation, and it is to read a book with a circle on the cover. So for that, I read Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. This is one I've been wanting to get around to for absolutely ages. It came in like, I think it's really pretty, but I wasn't necessarily drawn in by the story, and then I think it's been getting so much hype. Like, I've only been hearing good things about it, so I was just like getting more and more interested in reading this. I was actually quite happy when it got picked as all the book club books, essentially, because it meant I got to like really sort of analyse it with a bunch of people. And overall, I would say I did quite like this. I gave it a 4-star. It didn't quite hit the 5-star for me, unfortunately. There just wasn't enough. Like, it's not actually a massive book. It's only about 300 or so pages, and I feel like there needed to be more going on for me to get it to a 5-star, essentially. And I also just needed to like the characters more to get it to a 5-star. So even though I did like this, and I will be picking up the sequel at some point to read, because I am very intrigued as to where it's going on next, it didn't quite hit for me as much as I think it has hit for other people, unfortunately. Funnily enough, I think in the book clubs, people were very mixed about it. Like, some people found it to be quite boring, they didn't really like the characters, and I was like actually one of the people that liked it more, which was interesting. But a lot of people really did like the world building in this. It has a really interesting world building in that essentially gods have been outlawed and are kind of being destroyed, essentially. And so our main character, Kissen, is a god killer whose own family was like brutally destroyed by a god when she was young. So she basically has this like all-powerful revenge thing. I know she has like red hair, but I just could not stop picturing her as Vi from Arcane. That was like the vibe I got from her, and she was a really fun protagonist, honestly. Or should I say one of the protagonists, because we actually have 4, which I didn't see coming. So we have Kissen, who was interesting enough. Then we have a retired knight called Elagast, I don't really know how it's supposed to be said. Someone please tell me. And he was alright, but he was just a bit boring. But his story was interesting in what happened with him, particularly later on in the book. And we got to see him loosen up a little bit and become less of just like a kind of like, not a blank slate character, but like a very no nonsense, not much to him kind of character. Like typical kind of white knight trope is kind of what he was, and he did kind of get a bit more interesting as it went on. And the last 2 characters we follow are intertwined, both in the book and with each other. One of them is a young girl. So she's like a young noblewoman who disaster has basically just fallen her family. She gets rescued by Kissen, basically, and Kissen is trying to help her because there is a small god, so not a super powerful god, but like a young god who has kind of latched himself onto her. And honestly, the warlock vibes were massive. So basically this little demon, this little god is called Sketisef. And that is actually him there on the side. And you can kind of change his size depending on situation and stuff. But he is the god of white lies. And whilst he was kind of a little asshole and I didn't like him a lot of the time, I did enjoy getting to see his perspective because we got that and I really didn't think we were going to get that. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. There was some romance which I didn't hate. So given this has been the month of me hating a lot of romances, I'm going to call that a win. And it did come to an interesting conclusion as well that I felt was very satisfying for Kissen's arc. Not necessarily for any of the other characters, but I did think that Kissen's arc very nicely kind of tied itself up so that she's kind of have hopefully some new motivation going forward in the next book. So yeah, overall I did quite like this. The writing, it was very readable, the chapters were nice and short, so it was an easy read, honestly, even though it's an epic fantasy. So like often a lot of epic fantasies are very dense and stuff, but this one really wasn't. It was very readable. So yeah, I had a good time with it. It's not going to be one of my favourites of the year, but I liked it well enough and I'm intrigued to see where it's going next because Oh, that climax. That climax was a thing. So, 2 more books left. I read what I picked out from my TBR jar, actually, for the next subject, which is Inscription. And Inscription was to write down 3 titles, fold it, and then pick one. So I actually did my TBR jar with that because it just made sense. So for that, you can see I've like tabbed it all because it's a short story collection and I can't remember what all the ratings are if I don't tab them. So this is a Sandman anthology. So it's edited by Neil Gaiman and Ed Kramer, but there is a whole bunch of different authors in here. Some I've heard of before and was quite excited to read. Some I have read from before and some I've never heard of before. So this was an interesting book. Anthologies can be kind of mixed. And I think the last anthology I read, Cursed, wasn't great. Like, there was a lot of really not good stories, but generally a lot of the stories in this were quite solid, and I think I averaged out my rating in the end to be a 3, but like a solid 3, not a low 3. So I'm not going to go over all the stories just because there's too many. I think there's 22. There's actually 19 stories, but 2 of them are actually just kind of like pictures, some like art done. And it's just kind of like a very brief like ending thing at the back here by Tori Amos. But yeah, generally most of these stories were a 3 or a 4. So this very much does rely on the fact that you need to know the Sandman quite well. You need to have not just seen the TV series, you need to have like read all the graphic novels as well, because a lot of these stories do take place within certain times in there. So yeah, there was a really good mix of stories in here. I don't know if it's something I'd ever reread, to be honest, but I'd say if you are a genuine fan of the Sandman, it's worth picking up because there are some really good ones in here. I'm trying to just like find where my 4 stars were because I'll at least tell you a little bit about those as soon as they were like the better ones. So I gave a 4-star to An Extra Smidgen of Eternity by Robert Roddy. Oh, this was about Wanda. This was very sad, and it's basically about Wanda is a character, actually a trans character, in the Sandman novels, and she is kind of telling a story to her friend who is dying, and that is basically it. But it was very sad and very well done, and I thought it was really good. I also gave a 4 to The Writer's Child by Tad Williams. Oh, this one was really interesting, actually. This one was kind of like told mixed media style. So basically we're seeing this from this child called Jessica, who is like, she's a princess and this kind of thing. And then we're also seeing these letters that are being written by like her father or her creator that are kind of revealing a lot about what is going on. And it's very dark and very twisted, but I really liked it. I also gave a 4-star to A Bone Dry Palace by Karen Haber. It's funny because I've literally forgotten all of these now until I'm looking at them, because that's the thing when there's so many short stories, and I read this pretty much near the start of the month. I think this was the first book I read, honestly. Oh, this one is got all of the different siblings in it. From what I remember, it's a lot to do with despair and delirium, and it's about somebody who's kind of like stuck in this dream, only there's a lot more to it, and they're trying to break her out of it. And like things happening in her dream, it's turned out that it's more like prophecy than it is dreaming. That was really interesting. I think this was my favourite actually, was this last one, was The Mender of Broken Dreams by Nancy A. Collins. And this one was just really sweet. Basically, it's just about this person that works in Dream, and their job is to mend dreams, essentially, so they can be used again and sent out into the world. And it was just short and sweet, but I really liked it. So yeah, that was some of the best stories in this book. And then the final book I read, I also don't have a physical copy of it because it was an ARC, and that was The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. And I read this for demonology because the prompt was to read a book you did not pay for, and it was an ARC, so it fit the bill, essentially. And you know how I said I was hating romance so far this month? Not with this book. I finally had a romance that hit, and I am so happy. I finally got a good romance. I love this book, honestly. I can't remember, did I give it a 5-star? No, I gave it a high 4. It wasn't quite a 5, but honestly, I really loved this. So essentially, this is like a very cottagecore, cozy-ish. It gets darker. Sapphic fantasy about a girl in Ireland, I believe, and she ends up having to go back to her grandma's ancestral island to learn how to be a honey witch, which is like a type of magic that only certain people can learn, and her grandmother knows it, and her mother used to know it, but her mother's kind of like spurned magic, and she wants our main character, Marigold, I think her name is, very subtle as you can tell, with the flowering theming here, but her mother wants her to not do that because of, she doesn't want her to go away basically, and also because of the danger that comes with being a honey witch. Mainly because, as well as there being like these other kind of witches out there called ash witches that are kind of like opposed in some ways to the honey witch, there is a curse upon the honey witches of the family in that they can never fall in love, or presumably have anyone fall in love with them. So essentially, if she goes to this island and becomes a honey witch, she's accepting that she's going to live a life of solitude, basically. It was really good. I really enjoyed the romance in this. I liked both of the characters, and I don't know what else to say about this, honestly. Like, I have like a full review for it on my Goodreads because I did have an arc of this, but I just had a really good time with it. I really love the characters. I say it actually hit hard in terms of the feel, a lot more than I thought it was going to. Like, there was a tragedy that happens maybe like a quarter or so into the book, and that really does colour a lot of the book, and it really sort of makes you feel for Marigold. I will also say this is a very slow burn romance, which I personally really liked. Like, you don't even meet the character who is kind of like gonna fall for Marigold until like about halfway through. Like, it's all about her like living her life and finding out who she is, and I really enjoyed that. Like, it wasn't just like a book where the romance is the main plot line. Like, it became a main part of the plot line as we went further on, but we spent a long time in Marigold just getting to know her and getting to know her life and really understanding who she was while she was trying to understand who she was. So yeah, I really kind of enjoyed the way that was written. It's also really easy to read, I will say. So yeah, that was a definite highlight of the month. I really enjoyed that. It's actually a debut by the author, and the author's going to be at Cymera, which I'm going to next month, so I'm really excited to go see her talk and to get a copy of the book physically as well, because it's not out just yet. I know. It comes out May 14th. There we go. I was like trying to find out when it was released, but it comes out in May 14th, so it won't be out yet when this book goes up, but it won't be long until it does come out. I didn't know this was going to be a historical book. I really thought this was going to be modern day because there was nothing that I'd seen in like the synopsis and stuff that kind of suggested it was going to be historical, but it is. It's like set in around, I don't know, 1900s. But it does that thing that I see in a lot of books that I know some people don't like, but I really like, in that it kind of normalizes bisexuality within the society. Like, there's still this kind of like, you should marry someone of the opposite gender kind of thing, but there's a big thing about people being bisexual. Marigold herself is bisexual, and even though she's had relationships with men in the past, she's had relationships with women in the past, and I really enjoy seeing that. I always just like seeing a world that's like a little bit more accepting. So I know it doesn't work for some people, but it really worked for me. I really liked Marigold. I loved her relationship with her grandmother, and with some other characters in the book. Like, she has this friend who's in it quite a lot, and I loved their relationship. Like, they were so sweet together. But yeah, I really had a good time. Like, I think the only thing that really stopped us from being a 5-star was honestly just kind of like the payoff for the ending. There was kind of like an antagonist that was sort of bandied about throughout the book, and then we never really saw them until near the end, and then they were just kind of a letdown, and dealing with them was kind of anticlimactic, and I wish that they'd brought them in much sooner and been able to develop them a little bit more, so that it was more of a threat, because it was dealt with really easily in the end, I felt. So I think that is kind of what my only complaint with the book was, is that I do think that that conclusion with what happened with the antagonist was just not great. It was just a bit meh. But overall, otherwise, really love this book. So that is all of my Feywild cartographer books. Okay, so on to Thread Mage, which was 5 books. I did manage to read all 5. I didn't DNF any of these ones, thankfully. I didn't say before, but thankfully, because my astronomy prompt, which I dropped, which was the constellation one. I've already forgotten what's called. Picture there. But because I actually have the guild perk at the moment in Magical Readathon where I can still count DNFs, I was able to still count it as my subject and kind of pass it. I figured, like, if I was only like 10 pages in and I dropped it, I'd have picked something else up, but I was like 100 pages in before I dropped it, so I was just like, I'm gonna count it because I can, basically. But thankfully, I didn't drop any of these, and actually looking at them, I had a decent time with most of these. One of these was my 5-star, that's a spoiler. So, I only have 2 of them physically though, so I'll be just putting pictures up for the others. So first I had Alchemy again, which if you remember was to read a book with a circle on the cover. So I read the Lottie Project because it has these like little pictures on the front. And basically for one of the characters, Lottie, hers is like very much a circle. So I was like, it counts. And I'm not really going to go too much into this. It was a reread for me. It is a book by Jacqueline Wilson that came out in the 90s, I believe. Middle grade fiction, and I read it for a video, essentially. That is not going to be coming out until September. If you know, you know. But I kind of wanted to reread this one and see if it still held up, and honestly, it kind of did. Like, I've kind of gone off Jacqueline Wilson in recent years. Like, I really, really loved her books when I was younger, when I was kind of in that, like, late primary school, early high school time of era, which is, like, the kind of the reading age for her books generally. But I kind of went off some of her later books, but I remember this one being my favourite when I was younger, and honestly, it still holds up. Like, yes, it's written for young people, but I still really had a good time with it. So I'm not going to say any more about it, basically, because I do have a whole reading video coming out for it. But yeah, I reread it, should I say, and I still enjoyed it, so that was a win. I think I gave it a 4 initially, and I still kept it to a 4. Then I read for Spells and Incantations, which is to pick a book that a random number generator has basically given you the number for the title for. This took me so long to find a book. My gosh, like I had so many options and it took me so long to find a book that worked. I actually read a short story collection. I say short stories, it's kind of like a collection of 4 novellas all bound up together by Stephen King called If It Bleeds. And I actually really enjoyed this. I've been reading more Stephen King recently, and I've honestly been really enjoying most of what I've been reading by him. So this is all horror, pretty much. And I gave it a 4-star overall. There's 4 stories in this, and the first one was called Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which, if you may have remember, was actually made into a movie, I think last year or something. It wasn't really a movie I was that interested in seeing, but I was intrigued by the original story. And I really liked it, actually. I gave it a 4-star. It was really interesting, and it didn't go in a direction I thought it was going to. I'd say it was more drama thriller than horror. There wasn't really a whole lot of horror elements to it, but it was subtly done. It kind of gave me more like the Dead Zone vibes than his more horror stuff. But yeah, really enjoyed that. May check out the movie at some point, but I'm not sure, because the movie trailer didn't really appeal to me, I think. So that was a 4-star. Then the second one I read was The Life of Chuck, which was kind of just too weird for me. I gave it a 3-star. I didn't really get it. It's kind of a story told in 3 parts, and it's all kind of out of time. So you know what the ending is, but it's all based around this character called Chuck, but the first story isn't really about Chuck. It's just that he's kind of there on a picture on a billboard. Then the rest of it kind of does his story, but I just didn't really get it, I don't think, so it just didn't work for me. So yeah, it was still well written and I was interested, but it was just a 3-star in the end for me. Then If It Bleeds, which is the title story, which is based around the character of Holly Gibney. I found out too late that you're really supposed to read The Outsiders first, because it does kind of spoil some things about what happens in The Outsiders, as well as like what the main threat is. But I still really enjoyed it anyway, and honestly, like, I don't think I like missed anything by not reading it. I obviously just kind of got spoiled for some things that happened in it. But yeah, this was the longest one in the book. I think this was about 200 or so pages, and I really liked it. It was definitely actually did go into horror a little bit, but it was mainly kind of more detective. But I had a good time with it. I can't say I quite get the hype for Holly as a character, but I didn't dislike her, and I had a good time. Final story, I actually gave a 5-star, and that was Rat. And it does the thing that Stephen King often does, where his main character is kind of like a writer trying to write something, and he goes away to this like remote place where things are not great, and he ends up making like a Faustian deal with a rat. And it was just really interesting. Like, it sounds really silly, but it was really effective, and I really liked it. Like, the main character is kind of an asshole in typical Stephen King way, but I just really liked it. So yeah, that was my favourite of the bunch. So overall, they did round up to being a 4-star, because only one of them was a 3-star. Then for Artificery, which was I had to read a book with a lock or key on the cover or in the title. And for that, I actually picked up City of Stardust, which I'd picked up because the author is going to be at St. Mirror, so it's one of the books that I'd picked up for that, essentially. And as you can see, it has a nice little key on the cover here. So this was a Fairy Loot special edition book a few months back. This is just like this, I got it from the library, so this isn't a special edition, but I know it's been getting a lot of hype. And I was interested to read this one, but I think for me it just didn't live up to the hype. Even though it actually gave me big Starless Sea vibes in terms of some of the things that happen, I didn't end up loving this. It's not massively long, it's about 350 pages, and I gave it a low 3 in the end. Like, it wasn't bad, and I can really see how people would adore this. But I just didn't, unfortunately. Like, I had issues with the main character for one thing. What is her name? Violet. And I think for me, part of the thing is that this is supposed to be an adult fantasy. It read so YA to me. Like, it just didn't give me adult fantasy vibes at all. And I really felt there was this like big kind of disconnect between Violet, the character, and everything else that was going on around her. Like, she kind of starts off as this really like sheltered young girl, hence how YA it came across. And then like a little bit of time passes and she's kind of acting like she knows everything now. And she was totally unrecognizable from that first girl, except that she still kind of makes really silly decisions. So yeah, I think she kind of killed it for me. I did find the main, because this is kind of like a romantasy, I did actually like the main male in this. I thought he was really interesting. I thought his backstory was really interesting too. I didn't necessarily like him as a character, but he was interesting, which is more than I can say for Violet. But for anyone that doesn't know, basically this is about a family called the Everleys, and they have this like curse put on them, and basically someone is taken away from every generation to this other place. It's not actually the City of Stardust, it's this other like magical realm. And 10 years ago, Violet, the main character, her mother left to break the curse and then never returned. So Violet, basically it's coming up to the time that Violet herself will be taken, and she basically has to kind of involve herself in this like magical world of scholars, which was really interesting, by the way. I loved the world building with the scholars, and they basically like have these like keys that help them go back and forth through different worlds, which I really liked. And I liked how Violet kind of went all over the world in this, but it was very like montagey when that happened. Like, I think we got to see like one location mainly that she was in. It felt like we missed all of the exciting stuff that happened. Like, I think because the first half of it was basically her when like before she goes away, before she goes to try and break this curse and find her mother. And it just wasn't that interesting. Like, I don't think it really built up Violet as a character. It built up the relationship between her and her uncles, and her and the main guy in this, whose name I've forgotten, Alexander. So it built that up, but honestly, it didn't feel like the book really started until she left. And I feel like it was almost a waste of time, that first section, because I just didn't really find it that interesting. And I kind of wish that the book had started at the moment when she leaves, because there was so much interesting things that happened once she had left, and we got to see none of it. Like, we got told like one or two things, and that was it. And it was just a shame, because I feel like seeing that, we could have got to know Violet better, rather than what we saw her at the beginning, when she was just like this kind of blank slate sheltered girl that doesn't go anywhere. So yeah, I really thought that was a shame. I liked where it ended up. I'll say I did find the conclusion quite satisfying, and honestly I like that the romance didn't necessarily end in a traditional way as well. I appreciated that, but I definitely did start to find it quite predictable, and the whole thing with the main guy in it, like, I kind of saw it coming and it was just kind of frustrating to see it play out. And yeah, again, I just wasn't massively invested in their romance, unfortunately. So it had some really good ideas, and I think it could genuinely have been so good, but it just didn't quite work for me in that sense, in that I think it took too long to get going, and when it got going we didn't really see enough of it. And also Violet was just not a great protagonist, unfortunately. I think the writing to me just felt really YA rather than adult, so yeah, that was kind of a sticking point for me. I think this might be a debut as well, so like honestly I shouldn't be this harsh for a debut because it's generally an okay book, but it just, yeah, it didn't really work for me, unfortunately, but I can see how it would definitely work for other people. But yeah, it was a low 3. I read 2 more books then, and I figure we should save the best till last, so I'm going to pause on Inscription for now, and we're going to move to Restoration, which was, I had to pick a random colour generator book, I believe, and I got red. So I also had got another arc that month, and it was for Christina Henry's new book, which is called The House That Horror Built, and I was really intrigued by this. Love me some horror. Love me some horror inspired by horror, which this heavily is. So basically it's about this girl who ends up, a woman, she's a single mother essentially, and she loves horror movies, and she ends up becoming a cleaner for this like famous, eccentric, reclusive horror movie director. Massive like Guillermo del Toro vibes, honestly. And he used like a lot of like scary puppets and stuff in his movies. And I thought this started off really well. I find it to be really easy to read. I've never actually read Christina Henry before, but I know she has written quite a lot. I know she's written like the dark fairy tale kind of stuff, but then she's also wrote other thrillers, which I didn't realise. I actually thought this was her first horror. So I was really excited about it being her first horror, and then I checked her page and I was like, oh no, it isn't. She's written other stuff, this is just her latest. But yeah, the premise was really good, and I did enjoy, I would really enjoyed it for the first half. Like, I was like, this isn't amazing, but this is an easy read. I'm enjoying the main character, and I'm enjoying what's happening. I'm really enjoying all the horror movie kind of references that are just thrown around all over the place. That was like really fun because I'm a horror movie fan, so I loved like getting to see these references and like understanding them. And then it kind of just lost it around the halfway point. Like it got really slow and it felt like nothing was really happening. And even though this book like kind of does follow through, and like this is kind of a spoiler, so I guess skip forward if you don't want to know this, but like there's a lot of like, as there often is in like these kind of thrillers where it's like, is it something supernatural, is it not something supernatural, and it kind of does like reveal that there is something supernatural going on, but then it's not really a big deal. Like there's this whole like haunting thing going on, and it really felt like the attention of the book was more focused on the money worries of the main character, and I was like, I'm more interested in what's going on with this other thing. Like I totally get where she was coming from in that to her it was more important because she was like in fear of being evicted and stuff. But for me personally, it wasn't an interesting reading experience having to see that constantly over and over and over again, her repetition. Like the anxiety was real, I got it, but I didn't want to see it constantly, and it really just killed the story for me, unfortunately. And when we kind of did get the reveal of what was kind of behind it all, it was just really disappointing. You know, like when you put like a movie, it's like a made-for-TV movie, and there's a very predictable kind of solution that's kind of unsatisfying. That was kind of how it felt like to me, unfortunately. I did not like the end reveal, the conclusion at all, and then we didn't even get any like epilogue to kind of find out what happened with the main character, if she dealt with all these things that she'd been anxious about the whole time. It just kind of left it there at the end, and we were a bit like, oh, okay. So yeah, it's a shame because it had a really good concept again, and the first half was good, but it just wasn't good later on, so I had to drop my rating down. I gave it a 3 in the end because I did genuinely have a good time with it for the first half, and it was a nice easy read, but that second half just went downhill so fast. So thankfully, the final book I read, which was also for Inscription, which is when I have to write down 3 names and then swap them around and pick one out, and I basically picked 3 books that are from my Chimera TBR list, and I got Till Death Do Us Part by Rose Black, which is definitely one of my rainy day reads. I've wanted to read this for ages. I've been trying to put it in my book club nominations for so long, and it just never got picked, so I was just like, I'm just going to read it because I really want to read this, and the author's at Chimera, so I want to have read their book before I get there, and oh my god, I love this. I read 2 really good cozy fantasy romances this month between The Honey Witch and Till Death Do Us Part, and they were perfect companions. So yeah, this was my other 5-star of the month. Absolutely loved it. It was perfect for me. It had like the right kind of humour. Honestly, if you liked Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, very similar vibes. Like, I see this get compared a lot to Legend and Lattes, and whilst I can kind of see that, there's much higher stakes in this one. But the whole like idea of someone who's maybe not your typical kind of hero, I mean, he's a barbarian, but like, he doesn't really know how to be like a leader or a hero, make decisions. But him like going off and having this like crazy adventure with a bunch of really random characters who you don't really expect to kind of be in an adventure was just so fun. And I love the comedy. I love all like, he's like happily retired with his husband, who is a bard called Pie, short for Magpie, and his husband goes missing, and it turns out he's kind of like involved in like some kind of big thing going on that's gonna have like massive repercussions. So he ends up having to team up with a bunch of people to try and find his husband and bring him back home again, and throughout we're kind of interspersed with like these flashbacks as to how these two got to know each other and their relationship, because we obviously didn't see Pie for like a good part of the book. Thankfully not all of the book though, I did appreciate that, but we really got to see their relationship form and how Logan, our main character, changed. And again, Logan isn't necessarily a character who would be my favourite type of character. Like, he's very like, oh man, and very blunt, and he doesn't really get things, and he says the wrong thing a lot of the time, but I kind of really appreciated him. And I also really appreciated that we have characters that are not young. Like, these two, like, this married couple are, like, clearly older. Like, Pie is said to have, like, grey in their hair, that kind of thing. So I'm assuming they're kind of, like, in their at least early 40s or so. Like, they still look good, but they're starting to kind of, you know, go grey and stuff. And, like, Logan has, like, an injury that bothers him throughout the whole book. And then we had other characters as well, like, and it was just such a good time. Like, I don't really want to go into the other characters, but, like, I will say there was an old lady necromancer who was easily my favourite character in the whole book. I adored her. And yeah, like, there was definitely some kind of, like, plot contrivances that I feel like if I hadn't have been enjoying it so much, I kind of would have been critiquing, like how some things kind of were too easy at times. But honestly, I was here for a cozy, fun ride, and that is exactly what I got with this. And yeah, I think this is his debut novel as well by Rose Black, and I'm going to eat everything that they come out with, basically, because I absolutely adored this. Loved it so much. So those are all the Magical Readathon books, and I have 7 more books that I read or DNF'd, I guess, throughout this month. So we'll go through, in fact we'll deal with the DNFs first, because let's just get them out of the way, and then we'll just go from worst to best, so we can at least end on a high note. Basically, I picked up a lot of books of Chimera, and because I have such a big pile that I want to at least try before the event, I'm not necessarily committing myself to reading the whole book. Basically, I want to read the books that have piqued my interest, and if after like 50 or so pages I'm not really vibing with a book, I'm just kind of soft DNFing it for now so I can move on to something else. So that happened with 2 books. I picked up Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is a big sci-fi epic-y kind of series. Had more comedy in it than I was expecting though, which I did not expect it to be a comedy. I was expecting hard sci-fi, serious sci-fi, and it was surprisingly comedic, but not necessarily in a way I liked, I guess. So I listened to this by audiobook because it's quite long, and I think I listened to maybe about 50 pages or so of it, and I just really wasn't engaging with any of the characters at all. Again, there was some interesting concepts, but I just didn't like anybody, and like one of the characters was like an evolved spider, and I was just like, I'm really not feeling this. So I soft DNF'd that one for now. I may go back to him one day, but honestly, I just think that maybe he's not for me. So yeah, that was that. I also soft DNF'd Bridge by Lauren Bukes. This is definitely a soft DNF because I was quite interested by what was going on and I liked the writing style, but I was just not really liking the themes of this book. There was a lot to do with like drug use, and it seemed like there was some stuff going on that was going to do with like abuse and that kind of thing. And it's one of the longer books. I think it's about 400 or so pages, I think. And I just have other books I want to give my time to more at this current point in time. So I read about 65 pages of it physically, and it also had reserves as well, so that didn't help. I had to read it in like 10 days, and I was not really feeling that. So yeah, I read about 65 pages, enough to know that I would probably read from this author again, but I may not pick Bridge up again. I might pick up another book. I did look into the one that like I think she's maybe most famous for because she got like an Amazon adaptation. It's called The Shining Girls, but I didn't like the premise of that one because it's like you kind of are following like a serial killer, and I didn't like that either. So yeah, it's a shame, but Bridge just didn't really work for me, but it might be one I come back to in the future, but just not right now. I will then tell you about the worst book I read this month, and that was another arc, unfortunately, and it was one of those arcs that was like, again, like yelled out about that it's like a cozy fantasy with low stakes. You know, if you like Legends and Lattes, read this kind of thing. And it's Can't Spell Treason Without T by Rebecca Thorne. This is actually a series that's been self-published before in the past. So it's been around for a while, but it's getting like, it got picked up essentially by Tor, I believe, and they're kind of re-releasing it with nicer covers and I don't know, possibly some other stuff, I'm not really sure. I know like I got an audio book arc of it, which I would not have finished it if it hadn't been an audiobook, my god. And it was just so bad. I just really didn't like it. I didn't like the relationship with the main two characters in the slightest. I thought the plot was just kind of boring, and it felt again like things happened way too easily for the main characters. A lot of people have actually complained. I didn't really bother me that much, but I did see a lot of people talking about how this is supposed to be a book of low stakes, and in fact it was all high stakes. The story is about these two women, and they have been in a relationship for a while, which I really liked. I liked that they were in an established relationship. Or should I say, I liked the idea that they were in an established relationship, but then it became very clear very quickly that these two did not know each other that well, like, at all. Like, it kind of explained it away by saying, like, oh, they were too busy to really, like, get to know each other properly, like people in a proper relationship would. This was a fault in the character writing, I think, because basically I couldn't tell the two apart a lot of the time. Like, it felt like they had one or two, like, traits that kind of set them apart. Like, you know, one of them likes making coffee and baking, and the other one, making tea, sorry, and the other one likes books. So the whole thing is that they kind of like basically run away from the kingdom that they work for, which for one of them is essentially committing treason, and they run away to this like little village in the middle of nowhere, and they open up like a cafe bookshop. So solid premise, and it just didn't give me the cozy vibes like at all. I didn't like either of the characters that much. Like I say, we kind of switch back and forth between them throughout the book, and I could not tell their voices apart a lot of the time. So yeah, that was a shame. Like I said, like they kind of like go to this new village and set up a cafe, so it's very similar to Legends and Lattes in that sense. But where this really fell down is that they succeeded so easily. Like literally everyone seemed to like them straight away. They opened up and the first day the place was so busy, and that just isn't realistic to me. No, I didn't like it. I wanted them to struggle more. I wanted them to, like, for me that is like the coziness, is that them trying to connect with the community and having the community accept them, but it seemed like they had like no issues to go over with that. So the main issues that came up, there was two issues actually. One was to do with dealing with the queen, who, like, the whole treason thing, and that was kind of dealt with, but not in a very satisfying way. And the other thing was to do with this mystery around, like, why the magic is not really present here, and these dragon eggs that have gone missing. And the really frustrating thing, one other frustrating thing I'm going to go over, I'm venting about this one because I hate this book so much, but basically it has this, like, mystery building up about the dragons and finding these eggs. And then we never got the resolution. It's just like, oh, I guess we're going to find this out in the next book. And I'm like, well, that's just... why? Give us the resolution, because we've spent so long being invested in this mystery and then we got no payoff. So that was really disappointing. Also, there was a whole thing where there was a griffin egg gifted to one of the women, and it was this whole thing where she was like obsessed with the egg, and I really thought that we were gonna like have these really cute moments of hers and the griffin, and then it just kind of time skipped and they were like, oh, the griffin baby's over there, and that was it. I was like, oh, I really wanted this like these really cute moments between this like baby griffin and the owner, and I wanted them to be sweet and wholesome, and then we just got nothing after all the build up for it. So yeah, it was a really disappointing read. I will, however, say that the audio narrator for this was really good. I'd never heard of her before. I went and checked what she'd done, and she's done a lot, but a lot of what she writes is kind of like really just like free, like sexy fantasy kind of books. This is possibly like her biggest release that she's done, but she was so good. Like honestly, I couldn't have got through this book without her narrating it, because she was really good with her voice, and you know, I couldn't have got through it without her. So yeah, kudos to the audiobook narrator, honestly. Wouldn't have got through it otherwise. So on to the last 4 books it is I've got left. So I'll just go over the other digital one quickly. I basically just wanted something quick to listen to whilst I was out and about, and I happened to have this audiobook by Alex E. Harrow, who is the author of whatever this book is here. I can't remember it, but I'm interested in reading it. But basically this was an audio only. This hasn't had a physical release like ever. But it was free on Audible, so I was like, I'll pick it up because I'm interested in the author. And it's essentially just like a short story. It's called Patient and Not Forsaken, and it's a YA fantasy. I gauge it's maybe about 28 pages or so long, so it's really not long. It took about 40 minutes to listen to, and it was fine. Like, it was basically the story of this young girl called Patience, and she moves to this like this house that's kind of like old and stuff, and she kind of sees like a doppelganger in the mirror who's talking to her, and they kind of like become friends, and then time passes and their relationship gets a bit more twisted. There's also some LGBT representation in this, which I did not see coming. So yeah, it was fine. I think it was narrated decently enough. It wasn't anything amazing, but I enjoyed it and it was fine basically. Then I only just literally finished this like half an hour ago actually, but I read another Jacqueline Wilson. The new covers are really interesting, I've got to say, for the girls series. They definitely make them look less tacky, I suppose. I'll put pictures of what the versions I'm used to looked like. But yeah, I guess people are more willing to pick these up than how they used to look back when I first read them. Again, this is for a video. This is the first book in the girls series, Girls in Love. And yeah, I'm not going to say any more about it, other than that I liked it more than I was expecting, because I was slightly apprehensive going into this that I was gonna hate it, and I didn't. So yeah, 3-star rating. Again, it's not like the best book ever, but it was honestly fine. So my last 2 books, I read another book for Cymera. I picked this one up because it was quite short, and I absolutely love the formatting in this. Apparently left a bookmark in there that I just fell out. But it's got really interesting formatting, and it is Calypso by Oliver K. Langmead, and it is a sci-fi that's kind of poetry, I suppose. Like, it reads like a novel, but it's kind of done in a very poetic way, and we kind of switch between 4 different people throughout, and they're all kind of like, their formatting is all like different depending on who they are, and I really loved this one. I'm so happy because it was kind of like a spontaneous cover buy, honestly, because I couldn't find this from any of the libraries whatsoever. And then I was in Waterstones and they had 1 copy left on the shelf, and like, I absolutely adore how this looks. Like, we even have these gorgeous end papers. It's stunning, but I didn't know if I was going to like it or not, even though the premise really intrigued me. So essentially this is a sci-fi. It's about, well, the main character who we see a lot is Rochelle, and she is woken up from cryostasis in this ship called Calypso, and she kind of wakes up and she finds that the whole place is like kind of like a forest, but it's less kind of eldritchy than it kind of leads you to believe. It's a lot more about humanity and empathy and a lot of other stuff going on about evolution as well. And I really, really liked this. It wasn't quite a 5-star again for me. I think there was just a few little things throughout that just kind of stopped it from being a 5-star for me, but generally I love this. I'll definitely pick up more by this author because, yeah, this was great. Adored it. And then the final book I read, and my 5-star of the month, was actually another short book. It's more of a novella because it's only about 140 pages, and I read this on audio purely because, well, 2 reasons to be honest. It happened to be like the free book on BorrowBox at the moment, so basically like you sometimes have to wait for reserves on BorrowBox, which is like the library app, to get books, but they have like a whole bunch of e-audio books like each month that are kind of like always available for that month. So they had Idle Burning by Rinusami available, and I've been interested in this book for quite a while. I've heard mixed reviews about it, but I was just really interested to see what I thought about it because it's a lot to do with parasocial relationships, particularly within the idol culture of Korea. So it's kind of told from the perspective of this Korean girl who's really obsessed with this one guy, her idol, her Oshi, in this like K-pop band essentially. And things happen and he is kind of like flamed online, and his fan base kind of like are losing faith in him, but she's like kind of working through that and also working through what's going on in her own life because she's basically not living because she's only living for like the idol essentially. And this is very much an emotional 5-star for me because I feel like if I was objective then this should be a lower rating because I can't say the ending was satisfying or particularly conclusive, but I just loved the writing in this. I say I listened to it by audiobook, and again a really solid narrator. I think the only thing she's done is this book, but really solid. I really, really enjoyed it, and it was just like I just couldn't put it down. Like I just had to listen to it, and I finished it in like a day or 2 days because I couldn't stop listening, but I was just obsessed with it, much like the main character. I don't really know what else to say about it because there's not really a lot to it, but it just hit me at the right time, I think. So yeah, that was my other 5-star of the month. So all that is left to do now, I guess, because I've gone over all my books, is to do a little update for my bingo board. So I did actually manage to get through quite a lot this month. So I think I may have made progress on it. So this is what it looks like at the moment from March. So let's get through one by one and see if we've managed to make any progress. So, number 1, 5 manga series. I didn't read any manga this month, unfortunately, so that has not made any progress. So we're still at just the 1, I think, for that one. Read 50% of 2024 purchases. Nope. Definitely not there yet. I don't know if I actually read... Oh, I did, because I read Calypso, for sure. So that one is definitely one that I've done. I'm going to just kind of look and see what I got. Oh, I did also, if I can find it, pick this up from like a little free library bookshelf at my work, which is Carrie by Stephen King, and I've read this before, so I guess that counts because it's a book I've already got and I've read it. But yeah, that was it unfortunately this month, so just those 2. But I definitely have plans to read a whole lot of them in the coming month because the manga project is happening. Okay, 12 TBR veterans. I did read the Sandman, so that is crossed off. We have our 3rd. 10 horror or thriller books. Okay, yeah, I definitely made progress on this. Let me check again. So I was at 1. So in terms of horror and thriller, I read If It Bleeds and The House That Horror Built. I don't think I read any others. Patience and Not Forsaken is close to a horror, but it's more fantasy, so I'm not going to count it. Okay, yeah, so 2. So I did indeed make some progress on that one because we are now at a 3 for that one. I didn't do any Lima Crate prompt cards, didn't have any time because I had all the prompts. 10 sequels or books in a series. Okay, this one, did I make any progress in this? I'm not counting first books again, just as a reminder. So even though some of these are the starts of series, I'm not going to count them. So Sing Me to Sleep doesn't count, Assistant to the Villain doesn't count, neither does Can't Spell Treason Without T, Godkiller or Children of Time, because I'm not carrying those on, at least at the moment. Girls in Love is also just the first book in a series. However, If It Bleeds is technically the second book in the Holly series, so I'm going to count it. So yeah, we're going to say that I managed to do one sequel. Sci-fi books. I definitely read some sci-fi this month. In fact, I managed to read 3 sci-fi because I read Calypso. Actually, no, Children of Time and Bridge were DNFs. So I really shouldn't count those. So I read 1 sci-fi in that case, which was Calypso. So we get to move that up from 2 to 3. As I said before, I'm not doing my BFS Control my TBR at the moment. And 10 rainy day books. Okay, here we go. This I've definitely made progress on. These 2 are definitely rainy day books. For sure. I was really pushing both of these back because I needed a good reason to read them, and I finally read them both and loved this one, really liked this one. So, a success. So we're going to move that up from 2 to 4. Yeah, that is the progress. We're getting there. We definitely still have more progress to make, but we're getting there. Okay, so that is it for the wrap up. Bless you if you've managed to stay right through to the end, because I know I had so much to talk about. I really did try to keep it as brief as possible, but when you gotta vent, you gotta vent. So, that is it for me. Let me know below if you also did Magical Readathon. Did you enjoy it? Do you think I should go back to those books that I soft DNF'd? Please let me know. And as always, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!